Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're diving into one of the biggest curveballs elk hunters face: warm weather hunts. We dream all year about crisp mornings, frosty meadows, and bugles echoing in cool mountain air. But sometimes September feels more like July, and the heat changes everything. When it's hot, elk don't follow the same predictable patterns we expect during cooler conditions. They move differently, they bed differently, and they make choices based on conserving energy and avoiding heat stress. If you don't adjust, you'll find yourself wondering where the elk went, even though they're still in the same country. So today we're breaking down exactly how elk behave in warm weather, and more importantly, how you can adapt your strategy to find them. We'll cover water, shade, bedding shifts, midday movement, thermals, and how to time your hunts when the temperature works against you. Let's start with the foundation, understanding heat stress in elk and how it shapes every decision they make. Elk are built for survival, and when the weather runs hotter than normal, their first priority is to stay cool and conserve energy. They're a big animal. Unlike us, elk can't shed layers or carry a water bottle. Their only defense against heat is how they use the landscape. Why does heat change elk behavior? When temperatures spike, elk limit how far they travel, how long they stay in the open, and when they feed. Energy conservation becomes a survival tool. Instead of roaming freely, they shrink their world down to the essentials: feed, water, and shade. You'll notice that during hot spells, elk feed less in open areas where sun exposure is high. They retreat to shade earlier in the morning and rise later in the evening. Midday, instead of being completely locked down, some elk will get up to shift beds or move toward water. This condensed cycle makes them harder to locate if you're hunting the same way you would in cooler weather. Elk have dark hides that soak up heat, so they rely heavily on terrain and timing to regulate body temperature. They seek north-facing slopes that hold shade longer, dense timber pockets where air stays cooler, low draws or canyons where air collects and temperatures drop a few degrees. These areas become critical bedding zones during warm weather. Elk aren't looking for the best habitat on paper, they're looking for relief. When heat drives elk to conserve energy, it creates a chain reaction that hunters need to adapt to. Shorter activity windows. Expect elk to move for very limited time at dawn and dusk. Increased reliance on water. Every herd needs access, and bulls especially need it during the rut. Midday opportunities. Even when bedded elk sometimes get up to wallow, drink, or rebed. These are windows you can capitalize on. Here's the mindset shift. Warm weather hunts aren't a death sentence, but they require a different mindset. Instead of running all over the mountain hoping to bump into bugles, you need to think like an elk under stress. Where would you go if the sun was baking down, you needed shade, and water wasn't far away? Start with that question and you'll start narrowing down the likely spots where elk are hiding out during hot hunts. When the weather turns hot, elk behavior revolves around one thing above all else: water. Just like us, they can't go long without it. Again, they're big critters, right? And during warm spells, it becomes the center of their world. If you can find where elk are watering, you found one of the most reliable places to hunt in tough conditions. Why do water sources matter so much? Elk need water daily, and bulls during the rut need it even more. Bugling, chasing cows, and defending harems dehydrate them quickly, especially in heat. Unlike deer, who can sometimes get enough moisture from plants, elk rely heavily on drinking water to stay balanced. That means water is more than just a stop on their route. It's a non-negotiable. In warm weather, you can almost bet that at some point during the day, elk will move to water. The trick is knowing which sources they prefer and how to position yourself without blowing it. Here are the key types of water sources to key in on. Wallows. Bulls love them, especially in heat. A wallow is both a water source and a cooling system, letting bulls cover themselves in mud to regulate temperature and leave their scent. In hot weather, Active wallows are worth their weight in gold. Seeps and springs. These little trickles in shaded timber might not look like much, but elk will key in on them for a quiet, safe drink. Hunters who overlook seeps often walk right past a prime ambush spot. Creeks and rivers. Consistent but more often spread out. Elk may water here, but hunting them is tougher because of the long corridors. Looking for spots where trails funnel into a crossing is a better bet. Ponds or lakes, these can be great if they're isolated, but if the water is wide open with no cover, elk may only use the edges at night. Look for nearby benches, timber pockets, or trails leading to the water that allow you to set up. How do you hunt water without ruining it? This is where a lot of hunters go wrong. They find a water source, sit directly on it, and wonder why elk avoid it. The key is to hunt the approach routes, not the water itself. Set up on well-used trails leading to or from water. Position where thermals favor you, below in the morning, above after they switch. Avoid stomping around the water's edge. Once elk smell human scent there, they're likely to change patterns fast. Sometimes sitting water is the play, especially in afternoon and evening heat, but often you'll do better by finding the bedding to water or feed to water route and intercepting them there. Don't just assume a water hole is being used. Confirm it. Look for fresh tracks and poop in the mud, torn up wallows with wet mud splashed around, trails beaten down leading into shade, strong musky odor around the active wallows. If you see fresh sign, you've got a hot spot. If it looks dry, cracked, or unused, keep moving. In warm weather, water isn't just important, it's a bottleneck. Elk may spread thin across a unit, but they'll all need water. By identifying the limited water sources in your area, you can effectively cut the mountain in half. Instead of searching endless ridges, you're zeroing in on where elk must eventually go. This shift in focus can turn a frustrating hot weather hunt into one where you're in the right place at the right time. Not by luck, but because you understood how elk survive in the heat. When the heat cranks up, elk do what we do. They find the coolest, darkest place they can and lay low. Shade is life for elk in warm weather, and if you know how to read the country for these cooler zones, you'll put yourself way ahead of the hunters wandering around the wrong ridges. Elk burn energy quickly when exposed to direct sun. Their heavy coats soak up heat, and overheating isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. To conserve energy and regulate temperature, they slip into shady zones that offer relief. That's why in warm weather you'll notice elk leaving open meadows earlier in the morning and waiting longer to step out in the evening. It's not just because they aren't hungry, it's because avoiding heat takes priority over feeding. Certain terrain features consistently offer cooler conditions. North-facing slopes. These slopes get less direct sunlight and stay shaded longer in the day. Elk gravitate here, especially in hot spells. Dark timber. Thick conifer stands block the sun and trap cooler air. Elk often tuck into these spots during the warmest hours. Deep canyons and draws. Cool air collects low and shadows linger, making these prime midday bedding areas. Benches tucked under ridges. Elevated shelves shaded by terrain above can provide quiet, cool bedding locations. The goal isn't to sneak into these bedding zones. That almost never works. Elk are alert, and swirling thermals in hot weather make it nearly impossible to beat their nose. Instead, use shade as a predictor of movement. Think about it this way. In the morning, elk feed in open areas until the sun pushes them out. Then they slip towards shade. Midday, if the sun angle shifts or a bedding spot warms up, they may get up and move to a cooler patch. In the evening, they'll leave shade for open feeding and often pass predictable routes. By focusing on where the shade is and how elk use it, you can predict transitions and set up in places they're more likely to travel through without trying to stalk right into their beds. Warm weather condenses elk movement. Instead of roaming widely, they shrink their day into tight cycles. feed briefly, bed in shade, maybe water midday, bed again, and then step out at last light. If you know where the shade is, you know the anchor point in that cycle. This gives you a huge edge. Instead of guessing where elk might wander, you can narrow down where they'll spend the hottest hours and then hunt the routes leading in and out. Most hunters assume elk bed down by mid-morning and won't move again until evening. But in cooler weather, that's often true. In warm conditions, elk can't always stay put. Heat forces them to make midday moves, and these short windows create some of the best opportunities during a hot hunt. There are a few key reasons elk get up in the middle of the day when it's hot. Water, the number one driver. Elk, especially rutting bulls, can't go all day without drinking. Midday water trips are common in warm weather. Wallowing. Bulls hit wallows to cool off and reapply scent. During heat, wallows aren't just rut behavior, they're a way to regulate body temperature. Rebedding. As the sun shifts and shade pockets warm up, elk often move a short distance to a cooler spot. Cow and calf needs. Cows will often move calves to water or cooler shade when the heat gets oppressive. Find the cows, find the bulls. All this creates short but real chances for hunters who are patient enough to be in the right place at the right time. The mistake I see a lot of hunters make is heading back to camp at 10 a.m. and waiting until evening to head back out. This may work a lot of the time, but in warm weather, staying engaged during the midday hours can be the difference between a filled tag and going home empty. Here's how to make it work. Focus on travel routes. Elk won't wander far. They'll move from one necessity to another. Shade to water, water to a new bed, or a short trip to a wallow. Find these routes and set up where thermals are in your favor. Sit water or wallows. If fresh sign tells you a wallow or seep is being used, midday is prime time to catch bulls rolling through it. Stay mobile but smart. Don't blow through bedding zones. Instead, position along predictable funnels that connect bedding and water. Warm weather often quiets down bugling, but that doesn't mean calling is off the table. Subtle cow calls near water or along a bedding to water route can draw curious elk that are already on their feet. Think finesse, not full volume bugling contest. Midday hunting in heat is a game of patience. You might sit for hours before anything happens, and then suddenly a bull shows up to water. If you weren't there, you'd never know he moved. It's tempting to nap, head back to camp, or just wait until evening, but serious hunters know midday is often when the biggest bulls make their stealthy moves away from the cows. If you can grind it out, you'll catch elk when most hunters are checked out. You can talk all day about water, shade, or elk patterns, but none of it matters if you blow your scent. In warm weather, thermals are even trickier, and understanding how to work with them is the difference between getting a shot and watching elk blow out of the drainage. I get more questions about wind and thermals than anything else. It's just a lot of folks that don't understand exactly how they work. So I've got some full videos on that, but let's dive in just a little bit more here. Thermals are simply air movement caused by temperature changes on the mountain. In hunting terms, they dictate where your scent goes, and elk trust their nose above everything else. You can get away with a bad call or even a snapped twig, but if your scent hits them, the hunt is over. Here's the rule you must live by. Dropping thermals equals hunt from below. Rising thermals equals hunt from above. Side hill approaches work if your scent is still carried away by directional wind. Morning thermals are always dropping first thing in the morning. In the early morning, before the sun warms the slopes, thermals are dropping. Air sinks downhill from the overnight cooling. If elk are above you, you're safe because your scent flows down and away. This is why morning setups work best when you approach from below elk or from a side hill that pulls your scent off into open space. Trying to hunt from above in the morning almost always fails. Your scent slides straight into the herd. Now, daytime thermals are always rising. So at the end of the morning or later in the morning, mid-morning, you're going to have a shift, right? Thermals switch and they begin rising. If elk are below you, this is perfect, right? Because then your scent rises up and away. Hunters should shift to approach from above once the thermals are rising. On steep faces, the switch can happen fast, so constantly check with wind powder to stay ahead of it. Evening thermals, once the shade starts happening, you get them dropping again as the sun sets and shadows cover the slopes. Thermals reverse back downhill because the side of the hills are cooling. That means elk feeding lower will now be downwind of you if you're above them. You've got to watch out for that. It happens fast. I've been busted more in the evening than anything else. Evening setups work best when you approach from below, just like the morning after those thermals have shifted back downhill. Not every setup allows you to be perfectly above or below. In those cases, a side hill approach can work, but only if your scent is drifting off into a draw, shoot, or open space away from where elk are holding. If your scent line cuts across them, they'll bust you instantly. On hot days, rising thermals are stronger and swirling winds are more unpredictable. Sun-baked slopes can create mini wind tunnels with shaded timber may still be pulling air down. So you get, this swirling effect. That's why you have to check the wind constantly. Powder or milkweed is your best friend. It's not optional. Use it often and trust it more than your gut. No matter how good your strategy is, if you break this rule, it's over. Always position yourself so your scent is moving away from elk, morning, midday, or evening. Once you lock this in, warm weather hunts become much more manageable. You'll stop losing setups to invisible mistakes and start stacking the odds in your favor. When the weather is hot, elk don't play by the same morning and evening routines you may be used to in cooler years. Their activity windows shrink, and if you don't adjust, you'll miss the only real opportunities they give you. On cooler days, elk may feed well into mid-morning before bedding, but in hot weather, that window slams shut fast. Expect feeding to stop early. Once the sun hits the open meadows or south-facing slopes, elk will retreat quickly into the shade. Be in position before daylight. You can't be hiking in at sunrise. You need to already be on the edge of likely feeding areas or transition routes when the first light hits. Use dropping thermals. Early in the morning, thermals are still pulling that scent down, right? So setups from below are the safest. As soon as the sun warms the slope and thermals start to switch, you need to adjust or get burned. Evenings can be just as tricky. Again, instead of popping out early to feed, elk may wait until the very last minutes of daylight to move. Short activity windows. Don't expect elk to step into meadows an hour before dark. In warm weather, they may only move in the final 10 to 20 minutes of shooting light. Focus on staging areas. Elk rarely go straight from beds to wide open meadows. They pause in staging areas, benches, timber edges, or small openings before committing to feed. That's often your best chance to catch them. Thermals dropping again in the evening. As shadows creep in, air begins sinking, right? Set up from below or just quickly if you feel it happening and you're not there yet, because if you stay above them, they're going to wind you as soon as they start moving. Warm weather hunts are defined by precision. You don't have hours of daylight activity to work with. You might only have minutes. That means be early, be patient, and stay put in the right zone. Don't blow out areas by moving too much. Anticipate where elk will stage before full movement into feed or water. Hunters who understand this end up in bow range while everyone else is back at camp saying, the elk didn't move tonight. They did move, but only for a brief window and only if you were exactly where they wanted to be. When it's hot, the elk aren't the only ones struggling. As hunters, we've got to manage our own energy, hydration, and focus just as carefully. If you burn yourself out or overheat, you won't be in the right place when those short opportunity windows open up. Warm weather hunts also demand more from your body than cool ones. You're sweating more, losing electrolytes, and draining energy faster. Carry more water than you think you need. A couple liters isn't enough if you're out all day in 80-degree September heat. Use filtration. Know where creeks, springs, or lakes are and have a reliable filter or purification system. Being tied to camp for water keeps you out of the game. Replace electrolytes. Straight water can't keep up with heavy sweating. You've got to pack electrolyte mixes or tablets to keep your body firing. If you're running low on hydration, you won't move as quietly, think as clearly, or stay patient when it matters most. It's easy to charge hard in the morning when it's cool, then hit a wall by midday. In warm weather, pacing wins. Slow down your hikes to avoid overheating. Plan shaded rest stops during the day, even if it's just 10 minutes. Save your energy for the times elk are most likely to move, early and late. And remember, the elk are conserving energy. If you blow yours, you won't be there when they finally step out. Gear choices can also make a huge difference in heat. Lightweight, breathable layers, heavy clothes trap heat and sweat. Stick with technical fabrics that wick and dry fast. Avoid cotton. Once wet, it stays wet and adds to overheating. Ventilation, unzip side vents, roll up your sleeves and keep air moving across your body whenever possible. Hot hunts test patience more than any other condition. You'll sit through long, slow hours without much action. That's when a lot of hunters head back to camp or start moving aimlessly and blow animals out. Stay mentally locked in. Remind yourself that elk are still out there. They're just on a tighter schedule. Believe in the plan. If you're set up on water, staging areas, or routes to shade, trust it. Midday movement can be slow until suddenly it's not. Embrace discomfort. Being hot, sweaty, and tired is part of the game. If you can push when others quit, you'll be the one in position when a bull finally makes a move during the heat. Adjusting the hunt to match the season is critical. Warm weather doesn't mean elk stop being huntable. It just means you've got to hunt smarter. Hunt the necessities: water, shade, and the short windows. Manage your own energy so you can stay out when most hunters give up. Keep the mental edge that allows you to grind through the tough days. In the end, the elk that survive warm weather hunts are the ones that avoid hunters who quit too soon. If you stay locked in, physically and mentally, you give yourself a real chance to succeed when the heat is against you. Warm weather hunts can be some of the toughest conditions elk hunters face. The heat changes everything: how elk move, where they bed, how long they feed, and even how the wind carries your scent. But it doesn't mean success is out of reach. If you understand the challenges heat creates and adapt your tactics, you can stay in the game when others give up. Water becomes a magnet. Shade defines bedding. Midday movement windows give you a chance. And thermals, dropping in the morning and evening, rising throughout the middle part of the day, must always dictate your setups. When you combine this knowledge with patience, hydration, and the mental toughness to grind through slow hours, you'll be ready when those short but critical opportunities appear. Hot hunts aren't about luck. They're about discipline, preparation, and knowing how elk survive the heat. If you want to dive even deeper into the strategies, mindset, and backcountry preparation that make tough hunts more successful, check out Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com. Inside our membership, you're going to get exclusive digital content, strategy guides, fitness programming and checklists, a private community of driven hunters who refuse to quit, direct access to me for personalized advice on training and hunting tactics, monthly giveaways and discounts that keep your edge sharp. You can learn more and join the movement at backboneunlimited.com under our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.